Okay, thank you. This is the regular meeting of the Oregon City Urban Renewal Commission, and today is Wednesday, July 21st. Let's go around the room. January 21st.
Summer.
Yes, it is wishful thinking, I think. Let's begin with introductions on the left.
Rocky Smith, Oregon City Commission.
Nancy Walters, Oregon City Urban Renewal Commission.
Don Slack, Oregon City Urban Renewal Commission.
Rob Crocker, Urban Renewal Commission.
Daphne West, Urban Renewal Commission.
Doug Neely, Urban Renewal Commission.
And
Scott Archer, Community Services Director.
Nancy Alshar, Public Works Director and City Engineer.
Wimmer, Finance Director.
Dan Drutlaw, Community Development Director.
Nancy Ide, City Recorder.
I go back there.
Mike Savone, WIT Design.
In the back.
Einstein, Oregon City Planning Commission. Don Anderson, Oregon City Citizen.
Citizen. Great. We'll introduce these two guys here. Oh, two more over here. Sorry.
Good afternoon. I'm Dave Leland, Leland Consulting Group.
Larry Patterson, City Manager.
Great. Thank you. And last but by no means least,
Jim Nacita, City Commissioner.
great. This evening, I know that you have come to talk about the development agreement. We're not that is off the agenda for the evening, but we are going through the project, looking at all aspects of it, and answering some of the questions that came up before the Planning Commission. And if you have come to testify, we will be glad to take your questions and your testimony this evening. So, and you'll also have another opportunity when this comes up for final. And for the staff report, actually, let's go back to the minutes, I believe, that we're supposed to do first. The minutes of the November 5th regular meeting. May I have a motion, or are there any changes or additions to the minutes? Hearing none, may I have a motion for adoption, please?
Move approval.
For a second?
Second.
Moved by Commissioner, Commission member, what are we, Commission?
Whatever her name is.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to remember if we're commission members here, aren't we, as the Urban Renewal Commission? Commission Member West, seconded by Commission Member Crocker. Further discussion? Nancy, all those in favor of adopting the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Minutes approved. Next, the Cove project for the...
Should there be abstentions?
Yeah.
There doesn't need to be, but we just did it by acclamation.
Okay.
So that's fine. Next, this is our evening to hear about the Cove Development Project, and I'll turn over for the staff report to Larry Patterson, our city manager. Larry.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, as the Chair indicated, the agenda has changed somewhat this evening, and that is because there's a lot of moving parts still on the development agreement, and there have been some new issues come up that we need to work through. So we'll bring that back to you for your approval at a later date. However, we did want to bring this issue to you so that you can begin to get background and information on it and begin to move in the decision-making mode. So this evening, there's a number of things that we want to do. The developers, Pacific Property Search, are here, and I'd like them to walk you through the project and their plan for the project. I will review with you some of the major deal points that are in the development agreement as we know it at the present time, and I will also give you some of the changes that we think, or at least that we're working on, that may take place. Also, too, there's a number of questions that have come up. We've heard those at the Planning Commission, and we're prepared to address some of those this evening. We can talk about the environmental concerns, and we've heard questions about the floodplain. We've heard questions about water quality. We've heard questions about bank stabilization, and I'll have Ms. Crushauer address those. There's been some questions about the ability to finance, and Mr. Parks is here and can chat with that. There's been some questions about why a medical facility at this location, and I think we can explain why that is a good addition. I think you'll see that in the report as well. There's simple questions about the metal structures that are in the cove. I think as the developers go through their discussion, you'll find out their fate. There's questions about parks maintenance. We can address that. And there's some issues about parking, and we are working on that issue today. So, and then at the end of that, you can begin to receive public testimony, again, as you get more information and the development agreement comes forward. Many people may wish to testify again, but you can begin to get a feel for where folks may be at on this issue. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Ed Darrow and Randy Tyler. They are a Pacific Property Search, and they are the developers of the Cove project.
Good evening, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Ed Darrow with Pacific Property.
Randy Tyler. Well, it's nice to be here once again. We've had several meetings and update reports with the commission. This is the first time that we've actually been before the entire commission. But it's been suggested to us that we run through this pretty quickly, and we'll try to do that. So we'll get right into it. At a summary level, the Cove is about 109 acres. We're planning a total of 224 waterfront condominiums, medical office building of about 80,000 square feet, office restaurant building, mixed general office use of 58,720, and then a bunch of public amenities, an esplanade, plaza, restrooms, new trails, new parks, boat slips, a whole range of activities. Actually, 72% of the site is in open space, which is an incredibly huge amount. Typical mixed-use project might have maybe 20% open space, but this is really a neat opportunity. In terms of the status, we've submitted to the city. We've had our first planning commission meeting a week ago Monday. We have another second planning commission meeting coming up Monday the 26th, and we've submitted for the detailed development plans on phases 1 and 2, and the conceptual development plan for the entire site. And we are here before you this evening to talk about the project and the financing of the project. There are three main reasons that we think the public investment makes sense. There's the economic development, the recreational opportunities, and the environmental enhancement. And starting with economic development, there are several benefits to this project. There will be new real estate property taxes, obviously in an area that previously had almost no generation of income from taxes. There will also be lots of new jobs. The estimates are for as many as 350 during the construction period, and about that same amount as permanent employees in both the medical office building and the general purpose office building. The proposal meets all of the city's adopted economic development plans. I think there are 10 points, and it satisfies every one of them. It also satisfies every one of the economic development goals for the Cove itself. And then it's a good example of a public-private investment. So it seems to meet all the economic development goals. The recreational opportunities are pretty amazing. We can't really think of another place around here in this area that even comes close. There's Lakewood Bay and Lake Oswego, which is similar in size, but that's all privately owned. It's a private lake. The public has no opportunity to get onto Oswego Lake. This property will have a number of new parks, one up at the north end and one down at the south end, connected by trail systems, an esplanade, smaller trails that come off of the main trail, a range of water sports activities including canoes, kayaks, dinghies, dinghy rowing and racing, the potential for a Boy Scouts Sea Scout troop or a Girl Scouts Mariners troop could be the home base at the Water Sports Center. So really a wide range of activities. The pathways will have interpretive signs talking about the importance of preserving the natural environment. So there's really a lot going on there that's a pretty huge public benefit. In terms of venues for public enjoyment, new waterfront restaurants, we're contemplating as many as 4 new restaurants. All of them would be right on the water. So, in nice weather, what a neat opportunity to be able to dine outside. The plaza area, which is in the center part of the Esplanade, will be a venue for a variety of different kinds of activities, from arts and crafts shows to old wooden boat shows, antique car shows, things that generate community interest and kind of build pride in the community. So the recreational opportunities are really quite incredible. The environmental enhancement, again, over 70% of the site will be preserved in open space. All the water around the lake's edge, the cove's edge, is or will be city property. I guess it all is city or urban renewal agency property, and it will stay that way. The remediation of degraded areas, there have been studies, tons of studies, and they all indicate that the little segments, reaches along the edge of the water, are not in good shape for a variety of reasons. It's a very thin ribbon of vegetation around the edge, very narrow and very steep. And part of the environmental enhancement will be repairing and restoration and improving those areas, so that the square footage of natural habitat will be increased, in some cases 8 to 10 times what it is now. It's a significant contribution. In addition, for the peninsula, we think should be set aside as a nature preserve area with very limited intrusion, and another opportunity to do interpretive signage and get people into contemplating what it means to be stewards of those natural resources. And then finally, a green approach to the site development and stormwater management through a variety of different devices that make good economic or environmental sense, as far as pervious paving and rain gardens and things of that nature. So those are several reasons why we think it makes sense to have a public investment. The other sort of overriding factor is that the project would not be feasible without some public investment. But it's important to note that public investment isn't coming to us. It's going into the streets and the infrastructure. All the improvements in the first 2 phases will be to the streets and infrastructure, and not to us. Sometimes there's been some misunderstanding of people thinking that the developer is being subsidized. So I think everyone is probably familiar with the location, so I'll buzz through that fairly quickly. The public and private benefits, we talked about those, and this is just bringing it into the site plan. This is a good illustration of the range of things that are going on here. From the entrance to the site down here, there'll be a waterfall and a water feature along this area. So your first introduction to the property will be very nice with the waterfall and water features. And then this area opens up, so you have a nice vista across. And as you come down the entrance, this would be where the medical office building would be located.
Just a comment on the medical office, currently working with the Kaiser on this site. This building is intended to move over to this location here, facing onto this part of Main Street. So what we really proposing to do is, so when you come into the project, it totally opens up the window. It's not just stacked with buildings on both sides so that you don't get a feel for the water. When we have such an amazing resource, we like the opportunity to have a vista when you come into it, so that you actually have the opportunity to share that with not only the people who are living here, but people who are just coming to visit or hanging out.
So then the density here is in the most appropriate spot to take maximum advantage of the view opportunity. So this is where the 6 condominium buildings proposed for this area. and then went on around, calling this at this point North Park, and that would be an area where there'd be an amphitheater and gazebo, restrooms, and a ramp that goes down to a canoe, kayak storage area, and a water sports center building. So a lot of activity going on in that area. Moving along, this peninsula is the one that would be set aside as a nature preserve. And in addition, there will be some signage along here that would let people know that this is a natural preserve area and that there are no motorized boats should be in that area. For the rest of the area, we'll enforce through the sheriff a no-wake zone and a 5-knot speed limit to minimize turbidity and whatever in the area. If they want to go out and crank it up, they can go down the Clackamas to the Willamette.
If there was some unique venue that was going on, like a boat show or a ski show or something of that nature, there would be a special dispensation for that would authorize the use of this area, but not over here. This, when Randy talked about signage, it'll actually be buoys that go across here that call it a no entrance area.
There's some lifestyle pictures that give examples of some of the things that might be going on there. The idea is that have it be a really fun, alive, interesting, exciting place for people to live and recreate.
If you go back one there, Randy, just for a quick view.
Sure.
This area here, this is an amphitheater that we built in Lake Oswego, and it was not only utilized for people sitting up in the bleachers area here, with this being the bandstand. People would come up in boats and kind of drop anchor and hang out and listen to the music and what have you, and then also come up the ramp and go to the restaurant. So it becomes a very public access, very public use area.
And might also mention, knowing that people are increasingly concerned about finances, that didn't, the programs were all paid for by a lady who worked for the city as an events chair, and she would go out and solicit money from businesses for the various bands and things. And that was so popular that the city actually built another larger facility. It'd be really fun for kids to have little sailing classes and rowing classes, learn about boating safety. In terms of site challenges, the biggest challenge is the fact that we're in the flood zone. And that most of the site, truth is, was underwater in the 96 flood. But that doesn't mean it's not developable. With the proper engineering, we can bring the building pads up above the flood elevation and have depressions that create a balance between cuts and fills. And that's what we've done. We spent a lot of time with our engineers figuring out how that works. Every time we change a plan or make some fine-tuning, it's back to the drawing boards, and the engineers get to do their calcs and recalcs in terms of the cut and fill part of it.
And the other side of that was not just us making changes as we moved through the process, but it was the public input. We've had, I think, a total of 18 meetings in the last 3 years, so it's had a lot of public support and public input and a lot of comments. So where we've had the issues that were negative, we've actually modified them, such as the original plan that had floating homes. So it's been a long process, but it's been a good process, and it's one that we actually enjoy doing. So
some of the other site challenges are that portions of the site do not have structurally sound soils or have too much construction junk in them and need to be either worked into a berm somewhere on site or exported off the site. And whether you're importing or exporting, it's very expensive. So what you try to achieve is a cut and fill balance, so that you don't have to either export or import. And some of that, again, is by figuring out how to make the site work in terms of cuts and fills. Or you see that's bottom part about removing the piling. There's one interesting structure toward the east end that we'll look at to see if there's a reuse potential there, a way to build a viewing deck or something like that. That would be an interesting thing as opposed to tearing it all out.
the one which Randy didn't mention was the retaining walls. The way to, in fact, reduce the amount of materials that need to be put into the site is to grow vertical with retaining walls. So across the Esplanade area, in certain areas, there are retaining walls there that are retaining a lot of material and actually saving us the need to bring in additional import. Thank you.
I think this was November a couple years ago when Main Street was closed due to high water. And again, this is something that we have to plan for. Our relocated Agnes Street will be above the 100-year flood elevation, so people can still get in and out even in the event of a flood.
This road is actually being raised at the Agnes Main Street entrance also, so it gets up above the 100-year flood. So it's actually being raised in this area.
This is an illustration of how vertical the banks are around the edge of the cove and how thin the ribbon of vegetation is. When you get up to the top of the bank, there's not much vegetation. It's almost all along the edge and not a very good habitat.
I don't know if you can actually see this drawing over here right now, but this shows the vertical nature as it exists. So when you take and you cut that material out, which is the orange material here, it actually gets, yeah, thank you. This is the bank as it exists now, and there's materials here, trees and what have you here. Those will actually, some of those will come out, and then that material, which is orange here, rolls back and goes back up and creates the fill area back up here. Then we will take and vegetate from there to there versus just this little area. So this becomes a 3-to-1 slope. The dirt comes out, is used for fill, and then it becomes totally revegetated with natural materials and none of the invasive materials. So it all becomes standard materials it would be for that property.
Whoops. This slide shows where cuts and fills will occur. The arrows that are going upward indicate areas of fill. The areas that are pointing downward are areas where the site is being cut. This is the North Park area over here, and part of the reason to cut there, not only to get the materials, but to create a bowl for the amphitheater area. This area here, you can see how thin that ribbon of vegetation is along there. These are where the condominium buildings will be located, and the slide you were just looking at, the site section through here shows that the area being cut and then back up here being filled. The medical office building would be back here, and the other office building with the 2 restaurants in that location, that needs to be cut too to obtain material to fill in these other areas.
So what's happening effectively, we're borrowing here, rolling those materials here, and rolling them over here. And what's happening is that we're just moving the materials and creating a lower spot that in fact was within the floodplain, but now we take enough material out there so that you can bring this up to where it is not in the floodplain. So you're taking materials from one place, pushing them into another, so that you create usable spots within the site.
So we're not building within the floodplain, we're building above it ultimately. Finished floor elevations will be a couple feet above the 100-year flood. And actually the 100-year flood for the city is about 4 feet higher than FEMA's 100-year flood. So there's even an extra margin of protection there. And this shows a cut area. This is the Oregon City Shopping Center over here, Main Street, and then it's got a little peninsula here that will be cut. Unfortunately, this was an area where there was a lot of, there is a lot of garbage and debris there that probably will have to be exported. And here looking from the, this will be the North Park area, looking down along the edge of the cove. This is the peninsula that will be all preserved. And once again, you notice what a thin ribbon of vegetation is along here, quite a bit more on the peninsula. And there is a little pathway down here. The idea would be to just have a bark pathway down there and some interpretive signs, and have Parks and Recreation take a look at it once in a while. If there's too much usage, then something will be done to reduce it so that it can really be an area for wildlife more than for people. This was the site of the glacier operation before it was shut down. And this would be the site of Kaiser. It would be located approximately in this location.
What we'll be doing is bringing in a crushing machine. There's a lot of concrete existing on the site in this area. Back over here, there's retaining for this little area. There's excess concrete back here. So a crusher will come in and we'll utilize that material. We'll recycle it into the roads and into the base. And we've done that on several projects in the past.
This illustrates the areas where there's going to be cut or fill required, and again, it's a complicated calculation of volume to figure out how to get it to work and balance.
When you look at the amount of volume, it's about 250,000 of cut and 250,000 of fill. So you're talking moving 500,000 yards at about 12 cubic yards per truck. That's about 43,000 trucks of dirt. So it's not an insignificant amount of movement. That primary movement will all be done in Phase 1 and Phase 2.
And this is an overall site plan from the landscape architect's purview. The extent of vegetation is nicely shown here. So the edge of the condominium buildings, landscaping, down to the esplanade, and then into the area of riparian restoration.
The water management that was mentioned early on will be along these roads where there'll be swales. It's a section which we have submitted to the city for approval so that the water will actually run off and be carried into these swales, and it'll be bio-filtered, which is very positive. And then where water is coming off the roofs, part of it will come this way, and part of it will go into several filters that will distribute it all across the edge into this area, so it'll actually biofilter also.
While we're here, there's been some questions about water quality, and there's been testing done, and there hasn't been any negative results back. And interestingly, because of the tide, tidal shift 4 times a day, this area actually, the water is exchanged about once every 7 days. The other thing that's interesting is that this, obviously this was a sand and gravel extraction, so there's sand and gravel under this peninsula as well. And depending upon the height of the river and the height of the water here, that water actually sometimes percolates underneath, so that helps restore fresh water into the area as well. When Ed said we've done this before, this was the old Oregon-Portland cement factory on the Willamette River in Lake Oswego, and it was at one time the largest employer in Lake Oswego, but it was also kind of a noisy, polluting industrial use, and people that lived here in Old Town were tired of getting cement dust on their cars all the time.
This is like 50 acres. To give you a sense of height, this was 232 feet high. We got bids from probably 5 companies across the country. There's several of them that do nothing but take down cement plants. So we ended up, they came in and they dynamited this thing, and it blew over so that it fell. When it fell, it knocked the other ones over. It was an amazing, display of explosives. But then we took and we brought in a monstrous, almost a 2-story crusher, crushed all this concrete, used it for road base. We were able to pull out $500,000 worth of steel that we recycled. So it was a real effort, and this was done 20 years ago. So we've been doing this a long time, recycling and doing things which are now pretty important to us all.
And we had environmental issues to deal with here. There was a bunch of asbestos that had to be carefully wrapped and exported from the site, and there was some, what was it that was down in here, that green stuff?
Yeah, that was chromium that was down here. The city gave us this property as part of a contribution for moving forward, and we built an office building down here and put a restaurant in this area, but this was all city property that was sitting there. It was a prior treatment plant, so we cleaned that up and converted that into a use for offices and a restaurant.
So from that, we see the aerial of the site plan, The lake, Oswego Lake is right here, and of course the Willamette River. We did 422 apartments, 112 condominiums, about 30,000 square feet of office space, a 10,000 square foot restaurant. The water sports center is in this location, and a trail system that goes all the way along the edge of the river. This is Foothills Park, which is newly developed by the city, and the trail goes on down and eventually will go under 43 and connect with Tryon Creek State Park.
This project here was one that we did a few years ago after we did the Oswego Point. This was 32 high-end condos. They went from about $800,000 up to almost $3 million. And you would say, well, you know, are we doing something unique on the Cove site in terms of having the parking structure in the floodplain? That's exactly what we were doing on this project. It was well received. I think of all the people that even bought in there, was only one person that, you know, thought it was a negative. We did the same thing on another project, which is over on the Columbia. So it's not like we're going out and say, well, maybe this will work or maybe it won't. We've done it before, and it's been very acceptable.
And one other thing that's worth noting about Oswego Point is that the property taxes, the real estate taxes here, paid for the bonds that initiated the redevelopment activities in downtown Lake Oswego. So in that case, the tax increment financing worked exactly as it's supposed to.
When we started that project, the shopping center next door came in and completely remodeled. So that was a very positive thing for the downtown area also.
This is a project in Vancouver on the north side of the Columbia River called Tidewater Cove that we developed a few years back, and it too has a number of similarities. This is a wastewater treatment plant here. This is a pathway, in this case concrete pathway 12 feet wide. We revegetated all of the bank along this area, and lots of times we do things that we're not really required to do, like we built some new wetlands and ponds in this area, not because we had to, but because actually we thought it was a good idea from a marketing standpoint. These people who are in the buildings that are further away from the river get an increased sense of connection by being in close proximity to water that's in the newly created wetlands. There's another shot of the same project. 7
buildings here, 3 down here, office buildings, and a restaurant. This is laid out with 94 future marina slips. If you go over there on a weekend on a nice day, it's just crowded, people going up and down, all the way down to the bridge. So it's a real opportunity. I think it's what we do in almost all of our projects, especially on where we have water projects. We don't try to lock the public out. We bring the public to the project. And in this case, it's been a very positive addition, so it's worked out very well.
And sort of a bird's eye view looking at the project. Starting on a little tour down this is the area where there'll be the waterfall and the water feature. This is the general office building with restaurants on either side, looking out over the water. And some ideas of what waterside dining experience can be like. This is a restaurant that was associated with Oswego Point on an existing structure that was out on the river. Now this is from the North Park looking south along the Esplanade. The Water Sports Center, is right there. And you can see this would be the amphitheater and the stage area, little gazebo, be some restrooms there as well. And just some ideas of
The Water Sports Center that's in Lake Oswego currently has 3 high schools that have a rowing program there, so that cranked up. And when we did that, we actually did that with the city. The city had $950,000 that they were going to utilize to build that. We said, give it to us. We will build it for half that price and not go out to bid, not make it a public process. And we used it almost like where you would oversize a sewer system. So they were able to give us $450,000. We built it for the city and then gave it back to them. So it worked out very well.
This is the northerly most condominium building, give you an idea of what the architecture would look like there. one of the things that we like to do in projects is repeat certain design elements, like in this case, these are little eyebrows, and we repeat that design element here, and then you'll see it on some other areas as well. We like to mix up the windows. We have a variety of window sizes and shapes. So, well, actually, lots of times the thing that people don't like about new development is they feel it lacks character. And so what we try to do is figure out what design elements really reflect character and how can we build them into our projects. This is the entry to the condominium building. You can see the little eyebrow thing there. This is a water feature here that's designed in part to create a pleasant sound and to some extent to mask the freeway noise from 205.
We've built exactly this kind of a product next to freeways before, and we triple pane the windows. It's nice to create a water feature so that when you come up, it creates that sound. But the living side, which is really looking out to the water, this will actually be all protected with the right kind of design in the finished materials.
So this is the esplanade going all the way in front of the condominiums, and at the midpoint, a plaza. And I think we'll zoom in on that a little bit. Another water feature between the two condominium buildings and the potential for a restaurant on this side and also in this area. This has the potential to become a very exciting area. Whoops. Could be kind of the heartbeat of the community. This would be the recreation building or clubhouse, and you can see we're once again repeating the design elements, in this case the eyebrows, and this would be a very attractive building.
It'll be more than just a rec building. It'll have an area for doing physical things, working out, what have you, but it'll also have a nice lounge area so that there'll be an opportunity for community use.
And then looking at the combination, this again will, current plan is it slides down here to some extent, and the clubhouse building here, the condominiums going down this way, the plaza area in the middle of the esplanade also providing access to the marina, and then the other office building with restaurants on either side, and the restaurants have an opportunity for people on boats to come do a temporary tie-up while they come and enjoy brunch or lunch or dinner. But again, the idea of lots of activity, lots of fun, exciting things going on. Another shot of the medical office building. Different angles and views.
With them actually doing a different design and pushing it over this way, as I mentioned, so we'll be able to drive down here and not have this building actually imposing onto the view corridors. Want me to go through this, Randy? This is Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the infrastructure. The green is Phase 1. The yellow is Phase 2. The intent is to do these as one construction schedule. This is where we're borrowing materials. This is where we're borrowing materials. We're filling here. We're cutting back the bank and rolling that back for fill here, and then putting in the road, putting in this part of half of this road. So that would get us, in terms of a completion, in terms of the city's investment, we will be rolling the dollars that are coming out of this sale of this. A lot of times as a builder-developer, when you build a large project, you pick up profits progressively as you move through. What we're doing in this particular case, we're taking all of the funds that are coming out of this sale to Kaiser and rolling it right back into the rest of the production. So we're making a very major contribution way over and above what we have done already in terms of the pre-development costs, 3 years of commitment, and probably $3.5 million. So this area, in terms of what you'll have when that Phase 1 and Phase 2, will have these pads kind of rolled out and hydroseeded. We'll have part of this road completed. We'll have the north part fully completed. We'll have the esplanade done. We'll have all of this planted. We'll have a portion of the remediation done on this peninsula, and the reason for only doing that progressively, we don't want to rip everything out of there and have it create a problem. We like to do that progressively, take the invasive species out, replant, so we'll do that over a term of the several phases. This will get this pad over here for the Kaiser building, so we'll have basically everything ready to go in terms of going vertical with construction. after Phase 1 and Phase 2. This would be an entry statement that would start right at the entry coming underneath McLaughlin. So we'd have a little water feature there, and it'll kind of trickle on down. Phase 3 is the going vertical with the medical office. We are not the builders of that. Kaiser will be building that independently. So they will be building roughly 80,000, they've told us. So they will come in for a separate request for approvals with that design. This is showing what's going on in Phase 1, 2, and 3. This is all being graded out. This is all being finished. This is being finished. The building would be going vertical, and this area would be a borrow area. And we've actually done additional investigation, and this material is so bad that it needs to actually be exported. So we're not going to be able to take and use it so much as a borrow area as much as we are just going to use it for creating that depression, so that when we bring new and good materials into this area, we'll have enough water resources there to do the trade-off for the cut and fill balance. So what you see in terms of a 3D look, this building vertical, no building here, all the road system in, all of the planning, the Esplanade and the North Park. North Park once again, and this will work closely with the city on how they want to lay this out. We've done a design. We've actually had some people suggest that, well, if the people are sitting here, the sun's setting over there, do you want that? We've we might have to twist this around a little bit to create the window for the sun. This is looking at that end, looking down the Esplanade, kind of tracking on down to the other end of the Esplanade. This is coming in at the water feature area. The little waterfall would be right here at the front, going past the mixed-use building that's not completed yet, going up to the Kaiser, and that building will be slid back and going right on up to the road to the turnaround, which is here, and going down Agnes this way, getting to the other end, which is the North Park and the trail that goes along. Now, this is a very wide trail. We've had some comments that why is it so wide? When we look at that, when you get down to this area, you could actually have an antique show, you could have a farmer's market, you could have a boat show, you could actually have boats parked along here. There's access to be able to utilize this for vehicles, for special uses, for special venues. Then we're going to Phase 4 is the first opportunity to go vertical with condominium buildings. There are 2 buildings on this location, and the reason for doing the center versus saying, well, let's go progressively and move up the road, is to be able to put this plaza in and create that excitement and that kind of little jewel part of the project.
Critical mass.
Yes. So with that going in, you'll have these still graded out. You'll have these 2 buildings vertical, 80 units. If for whatever reason the market's a little bit softer when we'd like to start this, which would be crank up design elements, finish the working drawings at the end of this year, with the lender potentially could say, well, we want you to just build 1 building. So the Phase 1 could potentially get broken into 2 at that very first outset. Our desire is to build them at the same time, and we get more efficiencies and economies in doing that, so the intent would be to do the 2 buildings. And the recreation building, that will be used for marketing at the outset of the project, so that when people come into the project, they can park out here in front. They'll have a view corridor that will look straight out. We'll have topo tables. We'll have all the standard marketing. We always do our in-house marketing. We do not ship that out to third parties. We like to control it very closely. We create all the media for that, and we actually hire people that work on our staff. This is going to the next building, which is Building 1 and 2. This is Building 3 and 4, which is built. We're building these 2 buildings in the 5th phase. That's a total of 72 units, so it's this product here. So what you get visually are finished pads. So you don't have an unfinished look. This will actually be growing, will be well maintained. The whole Esplanade will be well maintained. You'll have these 4 buildings. Then going to the next phase, the additional 2 buildings, another 72 units, which will be in the 6th phase. So that gets you a completed product here. The last thing remaining will be the mixed-use building, which is Phase 7. This is an overview of those completed. So then we come back in with this building. Now, it says Phase 7, our intent is to actually go out to market with that probably within the next 3 months. So we might bring somebody at the table that would, we're not building this product ourselves, we've got a preliminary design. We would like to actually bring somebody and have them take that design or a design which we would work with them. The same thing that we've got in our contract with Kaiser. Whenever we've done mixed-use projects, we mandate a certain elements have to go in and materials have to go into their exterior design. We want compatibility. We want to have that feel that it's a very cohesive project. We don't want something coming out of the ground that is totally different from the rest of the project. So we have the opportunity to review design here. We'd do the same thing here and make it a very compatible project. So this is 7 and 8 mixed-use building going in. The marina, we won't go out and just build a marina. We will actually put it out for people that would like to have a slip, and we would build those out progressively. It's not a profit center for us. It's more of an amenity just for the public and for those people which are in the condominiums, and actually anybody that's in an office building also. And the marina. You have in your staff report this matrix, and it's very difficult to read it here, but when you look at it, Phase 1, infrastructure, and what happens, we've got the approvals that I have to go through. We have to receive approval from this body. We have to receive approval from the Planning Commission. As was stated by Larry earlier, the Planning Commission has already heard it once. They will be hearing it again on Monday. Then in terms of the land, we will progressively take the land down. And I think it's the next, this one here. This shows how we will actually be buying the dirt from the city. There will be a fair reuse appraisal done. So when we go to take this first phase down, that appraisal will be done, and then we will pay that appraisal less a credit, which I think it shows in your book on how that works. So progressively, we would take this down. We take down this area here, which is the rec building, the water feature that comes in. This is independently owned. We're buying that from a third party and then fixing it and selling it to Kaiser. Then we would go to the next phase, So there are these takedown schedules, and at each takedown schedule, we actually have to pay the city for the dirt. An overview, additional overview, the whole project, and that's it. So we open up for any questions, if that's appropriate. Or Larry, do you have a?
What we may want to do is go through, we got a lot of
Why don't you do
information
that?
here, and I'd like to finish all of that in the next, by 6, so that you can receive any public testimony that we have here if possible. And again, I think the next step is I'd like to answer some of the questions, with the exception of finance. I'm going to save that to the last, and then I want to walk through the deal points as we know them today, and talk a little bit about some of the issues that we still have to resolve. Let me just start with some of the simple ones that and we can add to this as we go along. One of the questions that came up is why medical in this, and there was some question about crowding this, that, and the other. Actually, I think this is a component, and this is one reason why this project has moved up at this point, because I think this is what everyone is trying to create right now. It not only does this add increment to the district, this is also a jobs creation component. These tend to be on the higher scale, and it's again, if we can get that piece in place, not only does that add an element that I think works very nicely with the residential component here. In fact, there's some folks who may work there who would like to live in those condos as well. But it is that jobs creation component, which hopefully will help the economy as well. The parks maintenance issue has come up. How do we do that? Again, that what we're talking about at the present time in the initial stages until the condos are developed, that would fall under parks maintenance as well as the parks would. We have anticipated that in the fire annexation plan, and that's part of the staffing that we plan to bring on to continue to maintain parks at the standard we're doing today. And that was all the discussion that we had when we went through the fire annexation about what our standards are, what we can do, particularly over the next 5 years, as we've talked about the maintenance of services. So that has been built into the plan as well. Staff is working on the parking issue in regards to the park area, and I don't think we are ready on that one this evening, but we'll have that answer back to you at your next meeting and be ready to discuss that with the Planning Commission on Monday evening as well. I think the metal structures in the cove, you kind of saw that there. They are anticipated to come out. And next, I'd like to turn to Nancy Crushhour and let her talk some about the environmental concerns. And the one I didn't add, as we heard the other evening, is a concern about leaching, particularly from the Rossman landfill or any of those landfills. So, again, those bases have been covered not only in Pacific Property Search's look, but also a lot of the work that Public Works has done in regards to this project. So,
good evening, Urban Renewal Commissioners, and thank you, Larry. I think I was asked to speak about the floodplain, water quality in the cove, and the prospective purchase agreement that we have with DEQ that covers the result of very extensive environmental evaluation we did of the cove area back in 1998, and then briefly about the bank stabilization and dredging projects. In terms of the floodplain, the code dictates what the floodplain requirements are for new development, and the code requires that all structures, residential structures and commercial structures, be constructed 1 foot above the base flood elevation, and that you balance your cut and fill. And that's really what we follow when we're reviewing development within the floodplain.
Quick question, if I may.
Yes, Commissioner Nocita.
I was very interested in Mr. Tyler's statement about Oregon City's flood base elevation being 4 feet, did you say? Above the FEMA floodplain. Where is that established in our...
It's in the code, and it's the description of the flood management area. It talks about the FEMA 100-year floodplain, and it also talks about the historic flooding from the February 1996 floods.
And that's in our flood management overlay
it's in Chapter
section of the code.
1742.
Thank you.
And it's under definition of flood management area. Then regarding water quality, there's two issues with water quality. One has to do with any kind of new construction you would do that could impact water quality in the cove. And if you're going to be disturbing the water itself, all of the activities that disturb those waters of the state would be under this jurisdiction of National Marine Fisheries Services, which is actually under National Ocean and Atmospheric NOAA these days. There's also Corps of Engineers has jurisdiction on those waters of the state, as well as the Division of State Lands, and you need to get permits to do things that are going to be in the water, filling in the water, excavating in the water. And then DEQ has interests in that as well, to make sure that you're not disturbing sediments and getting yourself into sediments that were contaminated in the first place, et cetera, and stirring those into the water. And then the new development in Oregon City also has to comply with our Water Quality Resources Area Overlay District, and that is, I believe, in Chapter 1747. It's in the Development Code as well, in Chapter 17. Then regarding the water quality in the cove, impacts from past practices in the area, including the 2 landfills, that I wouldn't call it quite Swiss cheese out there, but not to be disrespectful, but between the groundwater sampling that's been done for the Rossman landfill and the water quality sampling, or the groundwater sampling that's been done for the old Rossman landfill, which is the one that Tri-City owns the property today, and then the monitoring wells that we sampled to prepare for purchasing the property, there is a tremendous amount of groundwater quality information out there. some of the wells show that there have been some contaminants that are likely associated with the landfills that have been detected from time to time in the groundwater samples. The conclusion that's been drawn through, I would say, I don't think it's dozens yet, but there are numerous reports that have been done on the soil and the groundwater and the water, and the conclusions from that in terms of water quality in the cove is that they really haven't seen an impact to the water in the cove, particularly that would cause human health concern from the landfill sources. And they do note, though, that if there was some impact, obviously there would be some dilution that would occur once you hit the cove. But at this point, we haven't found that there's actually, that the groundwater actually connects with the water in the cove. And then Randy Tyler also mentioned that the cove benefits from flushing from the two rivers and the tidal current that the Willamette River experiences. So that is what I can say about water quality in the cove. Back in 1998, when we applied for our prospective purchasers agreement with the Department of Environmental Quality, we also performed some sediment sampling in particular locations where we thought there might be highest risk. And the sampling from that, which we submitted to DEQ, the conclusion drawn was that it does not pose unacceptable risk to human health or the environment. So that being said, before we purchased the property, the city entered a prospective purchasers agreement with DEQ, with the state. And in order to do that, we characterized the soils and we sampled the groundwater in the area extensively. I already mentioned we sampled the sediments. And what we found were isolated pockets of soil contamination. There were the constituents which would be considered hazardous substances that were found were predominantly petroleum hydrocarbons, and then some very isolated areas of arsenic, lead, and the petroleum hydrocarbons were measured with total petroleum hydrocarbons. These wasn't surprising given the past practices on the site. Starting in, where's that? Starting in the 50s, the cove was being excavated for gravel mining, and after mining the cove, the gravel was not only sold to others, but it was also used to make concrete and asphalt. So there were concrete and asphalt batch plants in the area that the city ended up purchasing. And so those kind of practices, you are likely to find isolated areas of the contaminants such as I just described. And in entering the prospective purchasers agreement with DEQ, they required us to clean up this very isolated area where we had found the arsenic and the lead. And beyond that, we will continue to potentially run into these petroleum hydrocarbons. And what was the result of the prospective purchasers agreement? Can I just start calling it the PPA? It's a mouthful. What's outlined in the PPA is there is a deed restriction on the property that states we cannot use the groundwater for drinking water. Actually, there's a deed restriction on a great part of our downtown with the same implication because of the landfills. The good news is we have South Fork Water in Oregon City, so we don't have to worry about drilling wells to provide drinking water for our community. And the other thing that the PPA requires us to do is if there's going to be construction or utility workers on the site, they need to have training in running into potentially contaminated soils, and there has to be a health and safety plan on site. And that is pretty common. It's the kind of thing where these are the kind of materials that in time, if they're encountered, you deal with them. And then in time, if you don't run into them, and if they sit there forever, they're just going to sit there forever. There's what we're concluding is in terms of a risk to the human health or the environment in that area, the risk is very low. And I made copies of the PPA. I made 10 copies. If any of you are interested in taking one later, please do so. And there's also a map associated with those that shows all of the sampling locations. So you'll be able to see there's been a lot of analysis done at the site. And then beyond that, I could just briefly talk about the bank stabilization project, which we did. It was back in, I think, 2003 maybe by now. Anyway, that's in good shape. We basically stabilized this very long section of bank that had become eroded away from primarily the floods of 1996. But then even we had some high waters the following year as well. And that project, from a structural standpoint, it looks like it's holding up very well. We've had a little trouble with maintaining the vegetation out there, but we're continuing to work on that. And then our dredging project, we are in the process. We have submitted a permit application to the Corps of Engineers and Division of State Lands, and it's into NOAA for review. We believe we'll get the permit. The issue at hand now is what we do, how we dispose of the materials that we dredge from the mouth of the cove. And that is an update from me. Any questions?
Any questions on this one? All right, let's continue. Oh, Commissioner Neely?
The one hazard we haven't talked about really is seismic, and I know that area is classified within Oregon City as one of our highest seismic challenged areas.
Right. The seismic hazard down in that area is liquefaction and lateral displacement. So I haven't looked particularly under the cove area because as you start getting in that area, you start getting into the more bedrock, as you see if you're going up the Clackamas River. But we do have some loose materials, like down in the Abernethy Green area. We've got these loose, wet silts that, in an earthquake, they shake and they liquefy, just like if you're on a beach and you move your foot in the sand. So you're right. That is, if in a seismic event, that is the seismic hazard in that area.
What do we have in our codes dealing with that for construction?
We don't. No, we don't have municipal code that deals with that.
All right, let's continue.
Yeah, let me, and again, on this next section, I won't guarantee that I can answer your question. I want to go through some of the deal points that are in the development agreement at the present time. And let me first remind the Urban Renewal Commission that we're here because in looking at this, we actually recruited these developers to look at the code. We recruited them because of their experience and their ability working with waterfront projects. And I think what you see there, both in terms of environmental concerns and the ways of addressing this, there's not a lot of developers that can deal with these types of situations and come up with the finished product that we're looking for. And we operated for at least 2 years under a memorandum of understanding that is leading us into the development agreement. And with that, let me just kind of give you some of the points, maybe a little disjointed because I'm just going to kind of outline some sections and what's in those. I don't promise that I have captured everything the way that Mr. Janik would explain it to you when he's here, and he'll go in much more detail. But you'll kind of get the gist of what you'll be wrestling with when this comes to you. And then I'd like to mention a couple of the other things that have come up that we're working with and need to resolve. First of all, looking at the site, and these are some of the issues that had to be wrestled with, the site was in multiple ownership. There are some parcels that's owned by the city. There are some parcels that's owned by the agency. That'll involve both a city action and an agency action. There are some parcels owned by Parker. There's some, which is Parker Family Trust. There's some parcels owned by Glacier. And PPS has entered into a purchase agreement giving them the right to purchase both the Parker and Glacier sites. And then there's also some options in regards to the sites owned by the agency and the city as well. And we'll discuss that here in just a second. I think you've got a feel for the development limitations of this site. The site as it sits today in regards to for development purposes, it cannot be developed without these type of improvements. There's cut and fill in the 100-year floodplain that has to be dealt with. There is some buried construction debris that needs to be removed. There's retaining walls that need to be built. The steel pilings have to be removed. There's power poles that need to be relocated. And you go through the litany of those type of issues. When we had it appraised, it had a negative value in regards to development of $12 million. The proposed development, I think, is outlined, indicates, and you'll see this in the development agreement, there's 80,000 square feet of medical office facility. There's 58,400 square feet of general office and restaurants. There's 224 waterfront condos. There's a waterfront park. There's a nature preserve, and there's a number of related amenities. You, as the agency, must approve the master plan for the project as well as the schematic drawings for the proposed project, and you're viewing some of those this evening. This approval is in addition to the required land use, and so you've got this on two parallel paths. You've got the approvals that are going to have to go through the Urban Renewal Agency, as well as the land use actions that are before the Planning Commission will go through normal land use processes. In regards to land use, Pacific Property Search must obtain all necessary land use approvals, and if an appeal is filed, that appeal must be resolved favorably to the land use approvals. And the city retains its full discretionary rights under code standards to determine if those approvals will or will not be granted. In regards to public investment, to overcome the development problems in the site, the agency is asked to provide a grant of approximately $10 million. I think it's 9.8 something exactly, and that's in your report as well. This will be funded with a short-term credit facility, and we'll discuss that here in just a moment, and then approximately in 2011 will be funded by long-term bonds supported by the existing and future tax increment. Part of the public investment, and this includes the $10 million, will be to purchase by the agency a portion of the Parker parcel and the Glacier parcel. Again, that's trying to get these properties so we can move forth with this development. The grant will be advanced as the work progresses and will be advanced as a construction loan with lien releases and the usual protections that would be imposed by a construction lender. Mr. Darrell, Mr. Tyler went through the phase development. Let me just chat about what is in the agreement in regards to that. Project is built in 8 phases. The first phase will be the work necessary to remove the development problems inherent in the project site. The result of that work will be that the project site will be ready for vertical development when that is completed. The area where the future condos will be built will be an attractive site. It will be open and landscape that's available to the public, and there will also be half streets in Agnes and, I believe, Main Street. It's a portion of that. The next phase, or the second phase, is the construction of the Kaiser Medical Office Building. And let me just touch base on Kaiser here for just a section. They've agreed to purchase approximately 9 acres of the land from Pacific Property Search. They plan to build on a time frame of anywhere from in this next year to 2.5 years. They want some assurance from the city that phase 1 and 2 will be completed, and they've actually are looking if the city doesn't perform, is there a buyback provision for their property? Now, that is a new wrinkle that we have not worked through, and that's what we're going to be meeting tomorrow to begin those discussions. That may require a separate agreement. Again, and the purpose is Kaiser doesn't want to be on the site and you've got the cove as it sits today and nothing else happens. And I guess in that regard, I couldn't fault anyone for wanting to see those portions move forward. They also want to make sure the city's or the agency's ability to finance, and I'm going to have Mr. Parks talk about that because we had conversations with the Bank of America today. The future phases is indicated that PPS has an option to acquire the balance of the project site, excluding Kaiser, the waterfront, the park areas, or the natural areas. Those will stay in city ownership. The condos areas are purchased in phases when they exercise their option. They first must demonstrate their ability that they have the financial ability to build the condo units, If they cannot demonstrate that they have these rights, then their rights terminate and the agency retains the property. If they acquire the first parcel, they must build the condos in 18 months, and if so, then they have the right to require the next parcel, and then so on until the project is completed. And again, this is the development agreement as we are looking at it today. I think most of these provisions I'm mentioning to you will stay. There may be some amendments to those as work through, particularly in regards to the Kaiser portion. In regards to the land purchase price, when PPS exercises its option to acquire the first parcel, the entire project site will be appraised for its fair reuse value. And that will be the purchase price that will cover all parcels they have the option to acquire in the future. That price will be increased by the CPI. However, Pacific Property Search will get a credit against the purchase price for the money they have invested to date in the project, and that's approximately $4.28 million, and a credit for the value that they have by the 2 years of work they have contributed to the project, and that's $1.2 million. That credit amount will increase by 15% per year, which reflects the rate of return that a developer would normally try to obtain on a developer project for the funds that they have invested. And that credit will be divided by the 224 number, which is the number of the condo units. So if Pacific Property Search buys a parcel that is shown to have 10 condominium units, the credit will be divided by the 224 condo units, and that's how you arrive at that piece of that. And I'm going to save that piece and have Mr. Janik work through that one with you. There are a number of preconditions, and here's what they are. Pacific Property Search must obtain the agency's approval for the master plan. PPS must obtain the agency's approval for the work that will be done with the agency's funds. Pacific Property Search must obtain all necessary land use approvals. The agency must have the ability to obtain the short-term credit facility and by using its commercially reasonable efforts. The agency must have approved the construction contracts for the work to be done with the agency's funds. And Pacific Property Search must have started the work required by the Kaiser Purchase Agreement to elevate the Kaiser parcel above the 100-year floodplain. Now, there's some risk to the agency, and let me just kind of review what those are. And these are the primary risks. First is Pacific Property Search does not satisfy all the preconditions. If that happens, the development, the DDA will terminate, and the agency will not be required to fund the $10 million. Secondly, Pacific Property Search does not exercise its option to acquire the first parcel. In that event, PPS rights will terminate, and Pacific Property Search will have lost the funds it has invested to date. The agency will then have a site that is ready for development that will have to seek another developer or wait until the market for that type of development comes up, and we could move forward at that point if that's what we chose to do at that moment. During that time, of course, the agency is not getting any tax benefits off of their invested funds. Next is Pacific Property Search acquires a parcel and then fails to build when required. In that case, again, PPS loses its rights as the rest of the project and will have to recover only a small portion of the invested funds to the credit to the purchase price for that land. Next, Pacific Property Search in some other way defaults under the DDA, and again, they lose their rights and the agency can terminate the development agreement. And finally, Pacific Property Search goes bankrupt midway through the development of the condominiums. That would be a default of the DDA, and the agency would have to get the approval of bankruptcy court to terminate the development agreement. Now, there's a couple of other issues that have come up, and then I'm going to ask Mr. Parks to talk to you about financing. I know that Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Janik have been in conversation on a number of issues. I think the largest we have, and Ed, if you have other things here that need to be commented on, definitely you can do that. The biggest has to do with the contract that PPS will let for this development, which is with, I think, Hughes Construction. They've been looking at that as a, what do you call that? Design build, and there is a question that we're still working through of whether that will require some type of public bidding before that can be let. So that's an issue we'll be wrestling with. There's a number of smaller issues, but I think those are still in discussion at the present time, and be glad to go through those if we can't get those resolved with you at some point. Yeah. So with that, I'd like to have Mr. Parks come forward, and we'll talk a little bit about financing, and then if you want to receive testimony or if you have questions, we'll be glad to try to answer all those. The legal stuff, I don't guarantee I can do unless you want me to play attorney, and that's really an ugly picture when I do that.
Madam Chair and Commission members, Andy Parks with Leland Consulting. I think it may be helpful if you were to look at page 25 of your report. I'll try and just summarize for you the financing element that's contemplated here in those forecasts. Roughly, the agency currently has the capacity to issue approximately $7.5 million worth of long-term debt for whatever purpose, included in your plan. It's not quite adequate to provide the $10 million sought for this particular project. What we have looked at doing is a $10 million line of credit facility. That money would go directly into the infrastructure improvements that is included in their proposal. That $10 million line of credit would be converted into a long-term security in 2010, at which time the taxable assessed value of the agency's district would be adequate without the cove to ultimately support debt service associated with the $10 million issue. So it's a timing issue in terms of getting the full $10 million and therefore utilizing a line of credit versus a full-fledged, typical 20-year type bond. I think there's some other advantages to doing that that we've talked a little bit about with your staff and with the project folks as well. With the market being what it is today, it is a little the interest earnings, if you will, if we were, in other words, sell the $10 million in bonds and then reinvest those dollars into the marketplace today, you're looking at interest rates that are very low. You'd be paying somewhere in the neighborhood of 5%, earning somewhere in the neighborhood of 1%. So you'd have a negative 4% cost to this, from a financing standpoint. A line of credit, conversely, would be paying interest only on that amount that you ultimately had borrowed. So that's a cost advantage, cost savings actually to the deal for the agency. Again, converting it once the project is completed, and again with just putting the money into the ground, whether it ultimately results in any taxable assessed value increase or not, the projections right now indicate that the coverage that will be necessary, which is 125% of your annual debt service requirement, is the money that you'd be needing to generate in property taxes. And those forecasts all indicate that that would be done, again, with or without the Cove project being done. If you're looking at page 25 again, this goes out till 2021. The key number in the analysis that attempting to meet is at the very bottom of that table. You'll see the required DCR, which is the required debt coverage ratio of 125%, and then the debt coverage ratio number right above that. We're attempting to make sure that is in excess of the 125, and again it does meet that. And again, this does include $10 million worth of taxable assessed value in 2011, again, directly resulting from the $18 million going into road and other site work improvements at that location. And again, even if taking that away, you're still going to have approximately $2 million worth of property tax collection next year, which again provides adequate coverage in collection relative back to the bond debt service.
Let me indicate, too, that we did have a conversation with Bank of America this morning. Of course, we've had a long relationship with them, especially in regards to urban renewal financing. They do express interest in looking at this financing. They cannot give us a letter of commitment because there's a number of due diligence they have to go through in doing that. But this is a conversation not only we've had today, but we actually had it back when we issued the first $10 million in regards to this type of approach to financing the second $10 million. So that looks promising, but again, they can't provide that letter of commitment yet. They will supply a letter of interest on that, and we'll have the other when they can deliver that, if they can, which we feel confident right now that we can move in that direction. So.
Any questions about finance at this point?
Let me mention a couple other things. There is a memo that kind of addresses some of those other issues that I had mentioned to you, and I'll get that out to you tomorrow. I just didn't get that run off this afternoon. I'm kind of scrambling to get everything as we came to the meeting here this evening, but that'll kind of give you a list of the other issues that we're working through. As you look at this, you can see this is a pretty complex set of arrangements. I think this is probably more reflective of what is going to be required of government agencies in the future in public-private type of partnership versus let's build it and hope they come. This is actually trying to make something happen. It is can feel a little uncomfortable as we go through this, but hopefully we can answer your questions as we move through the next few weeks and getting to a point where you can make a decision on this project.
Okay, Commissioner Walters.
Thank you.
Great.
I have a question on the property tax resources that's on page 25. You have the total as $47,252,000. Can you tell me what is that comprised of? Is that the Cove alone, or does that include other areas in the district?
Yes, and that total would be the total from fiscal year 2009 through fiscal year 2021. Right. And that represents the total property taxes anticipated to be collected from the entire district.
Is it possible to segregate that line so that we can see what's just from the Cove project?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think in summary form, in 2009 dollars, the property taxes generated by this development is estimated to be about $1,550,000. You would find that on page 10, I believe. And that number, and again, that's a build out, and that number would be increasing by approximately 3% per year. But certainly can break that out for your analysis. And again, that is on.
Are you referring to the third bullet on page 10? It says property tax revenues. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Exactly. Yes.
Any questions? A few questions, actually. Point of procedure, are we going to discuss this more fully after public testimony?
We can do it either way.
Okay.
Whatever you'd like.
Okay.
If you'd like to do questions.
I have some of my own. I might have others. If there's anybody in the audience that has something to say, it might trigger another question. And I assume that the applicants, the developers, will be available for questions
you bet
after
they will.
public testimony as well. Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to get more clarity from the developers regarding the timing of your submittal of both the land use approval application to the Planning Commission and your request for the development agreement approval before us right now. I know it has to do something with Kaiser, but I'm not really clear on what's really going on in that regards.
I think if you flip over to this development matrix, which is in your book, do you know what that is? Be in the appendix. Under phase 1 and phase 2 of that, called development chronology matrix, phase 1 and phase 2. The approvals that we will be required to receive will be the master plan approval, the concept development plan, the detailed development plan, and ultimately the DDA, which would be through this group. So we are already submitted to the Planning Commission. We've gone through one hearing. We have another hearing, which is next Monday. At that hearing, it would be our expectation to have it approved. So what that gets us is the overall master plan is approved, and Phase 1 and Phase 2 and a detailed design plan will be approved. That would give us the ability to move forward with building out Phase 1 and Phase 2. So then when Kaiser comes along and says, all right, well, we want to build our building now, they will have to submit a formal plan. It'll come in and be reviewed. And when we want to go to the next detailed plan, which would be going vertical with buildings, and that would be stepping over to the next yellow shot here, Phase 3 and 4, we would be submitting an additional infrastructure. There's about $1.6 million additional infrastructure that we will pay for that has to go in prior to going vertical with those buildings. So those 2 additional buildings, they'll come in, we'll get those approved, we'll get the additional infrastructure on a detailed plan approved, and then we progress right on down the line as we do the balance of the buildings.
So Kaiser's interest in building the medical facility, are they under some sort of deadline that they're up against right now as far as their desire to build right away?
We are the ones that have the deadline from them to move forward with Phase 1 and Phase 2. Phase 1 goes through and moves the dirt onto their site, completes the main street in total, and completes half of Agnes.
Okay.
Phase 2 does the rest of the dirt movement on the condo area. So they have put us in a contractual obligation to complete that work within 12 months of their closing. Our closing schedule with them is currently scheduled for February 9th.
Now, what is driving their timeline?
Their timeline to go vertical or their timeline to receive our completed work?
Both.
Well, we have a mandate to complete the work, so we'll do that. Then they don't have a lock-in time frame. They will have spent $7.5 million to purchase the land and to purchase the improvements that are there. So we don't have a formal schedule for them. My expectation would be that when you write a check for that kind of an investment, that you would move forward to get a return. So it's a very substantial commitment. When we actually entertained working with them, they were specifically looking for a parcel within this geographical area and within the 213 and the 205, so, and with freeway visibility. So this is a perfect match for them. So our expectation is that they would move it forward directly.
Now, do they have financing for the medical office building that they want to construct?
Very uniquely, they write a check. One of the reasons that we modified our plan, we had, as you might recall, we had 42 townhouses and we had an additional 70 condominiums over there. The 42 townhouses, when you were designing those within the floodplain area, they had to have their garages into the floodplain. And that was a structural design that was necessary to get it out of the floodplain, but it added so much of the cost that we went beyond a market rate that we felt that we could sell it. So we stripped that off, and we've done probably 3 iterations on that, and we said, let's go for the medical community. Given what is happening in the overall finance world right now, there are a few people out there that really don't have to borrow money. They have money. This is one of those cases. So
that's what I wanted to clarify. It seems that if they're not subject to the credit freeze and can write their own check, it is in our interest certainly to, as Mr. Patterson was saying, take advantage of this opportunity for some job creation because we have a developer of the medical facility that can write its own check even in these times.
And it is unique, and I, being in this business for about 35 years, usually when you write a check for that much, you want to start getting a return on it. And I would imagine a corporate entity of that size has the same kind of a finance requirement internally, that if they make an investment, they want to get a return, and they're not just going to buy a piece of dirt and sit there and look at it. So I don't have a lock-in date, but my expectation is that they would move it forward.
I'm sorry.
My expectation is that Kaiser would move it forward sooner than later. I mean, it's a lot of money to invest and not go into production.
I have other questions if someone else has a question, or I can just wait till after testimony.
It's up to you.
No, Doug asked a question if he has.
You want to do first? Okay. Yeah, you should finish now. I think it's more, I want to be efficient about the time, so why don't you just go ahead and do that, and then we'll move.
If I could add one additional thing that I think is very positive on this Phase 1 and Phase 2, with the support of this agency and the financing, and together with the funds that are coming out of the Kaiser closing, we're able to take and develop the whole site. So what you have is not only just Kaiser's pad done, you have Main Street, you have part of Agnes, you have all of the condo sites totally done, you have the North Park, you have the whole park and Esplanade done. So as a community resource, you've got a major park that's sitting there done, and the opportunity is saying, all right, if we perform, we can build these 224 condos. If we don't perform, you've got a fully completed park and a fully completed infrastructure and a fully completed, ready-to-go development pad that would be, I would think, very marketable. It doesn't mean that it has to stick with, if we didn't perform, that pad is very valuable in terms of just going vertical with, it could be apartments, it could be additional offices. There's a whole bunch of things that it would actually be potentially usable.
Okay. The other question I had, I was wondering if we could put the slide back up of the kind of bird's eye view that's in that first photograph over there.
We can just, want to use just the photograph?
Yeah, I guess I could just use the photograph.
Get our Vanna Patterson to bring that over.
Fetch.
Thank you. Okay. I wanted to ask you about the flexibility of your program. And the reason I want to raise that is something that I campaigned over at the fall as a city commissioner. I actually really appreciate the design you have. There's some concerns I have after reading the staff report. Basically, the minimum size unit being 1,400 square feet. That's actually larger than my house, and I'm concerned about this being kind of limited to very affluent people. And what I was wondering is whether I don't mind going even denser. I'm very into density. I'm also into very good design, which is one of the things I appreciate about what I've heard about you gentlemen as developers. Seeing some of the other projects was interesting for me. But I'm wondering if you, because I don't think this would involve any regrading and having to pay your engineers again to recalculate that cut and balance fill. But I'm wondering if, at least from your perspective, it would be possible to create more density on the site by going even more vertical, both to give us as a community more property taxes and perhaps you more revenue, and widening the range of incomes for whom this development would be accessible. Specifically, I even mentioned this during our city commission debate, that if you went vertical, I mean really vertical, you could have views not just of the Cove, but of the Clackamas and Willamette rivers. I don't mean something like the South Waterfront, because that type of glass and steel construction I don't like at all. But if you were to say that site there, I think could be more vertical. The medical site could be more vertical. And then instead of building these two buildings first and then these two, I'm wondering if you could consider building these two buildings, then this one and this one, kind of bookend them, and then consider, depending on market conditions, these far two complexes being, higher, maybe up to 5 or 10 stories, with more, smaller units and more affordable units.
If I could respond, please. I'm Dave Leland. I'm an advisor to the city. We've been through, I think, 15 separate plans on the property trying to get it to work. Part of the strategy for the entirety of downtown is to create a diversity of product. And so one of the things that we have been discussing over the past several years is how do we get workforce housing at a more affordable rate in proximity over to the rivers. For example, the county shops property is for sale. There's some other properties over there where we can get more affordable product. The challenge on this property is parking it and getting enough yield off the land to be able to pay, to make the economics make sense. We have drilled into this so many different ways. I know Ed and Randy have gone through extensive site plans. We can certainly look at this further, but we're trying to create throughout the, you can't do everything in one project, but throughout a downtown, and we've been involved in over 80 downtowns across America, is you try to get that balance between high-end, middle-income workforce, rental, ownership, office, retail, and so on. And collectively, I think we can accomplish that. We just can't accomplish it all on one site. That would be, I think, but we have, but your concern, as expressed, is certainly being considered as we look at the entirety of downtown Oregon City.
And on this project specifically, we have pushed the envelope as far as parking. Matter of fact, the city actually pushed back when it went through the planning process on the Kaiser site, requesting that we reduce the amount of parking there. We're at a 2-to-1, which is probably minimal that you'd want to do for condominiums, and we've utilized the site. When you go over to the mixed-use building at almost 60,000 square feet, that has a 2-level parking structure, which when you go to a suburban office space, that is not what you want to have. You don't want to have parking structures. You want to have parking exterior. Because of the location of that site, you can't do it. So when you go ahead and go vertical, you have to reduce the cost of the dirt. So the podiums, the 2 levels of parking structures, actually, in terms of cost, almost equal the amount of the dirt. So the dirt would actually not be a positive profit center, but to bring the project online for tax increment and to build it becomes a tax opportunity. So we've really, we've done it many ways, and as Dave mentioned, we've gone through several iterations, and we think that we've kind of maxed them out. Right now, at 5 stories for this suburban setting, I think that we have maxed it out, and I would be very reluctant to push it higher.
But in phased projects, the current phase is always the teacher for the next phase. So if the market resists to the larger units and there's a schedule that has to be met, then you end up redesigning to the market, which may be going down. So it's continuous learning, as you're probably aware.
Has the proposal been considered of changing the city code to reduce or eliminate the parking minimum requirement?
You know,
I think the parking is really driven by the market as
Exactly.
what is required in a condominium. And it's usually captive spaces that are owned outright by the occupant of the condominium, as opposed to an apartment project where you have a hunting permit in the parking lot to be able to find a spot for your car.
Yeah,
And then we don't have public transit to this area yet, and so that's another sort of inhibitor.
yeah, we build thousands of apartment projects, and usually we're shooting at like 1.5 or 1.2 per unit. You cannot build a condo project of this type without having a minimum of 2 units per parking. It's just market-driven. It's not a function of the code. People will not do it if you don't have it. And we've built many projects, so it's a market-driven issue.
Commissioner Neely.
First one, it's probably both an Ed and a Nancy question. I know that Metro has a cut and fill requirement for the whole metro region. The city, in its own code, has one. Is Metro's cut and fill driven by the flood plain level that we've chosen, or is it driven by a different flood plain, or do you know?
I think Nancy's probably better equipped, but I would understand that it's national floodplain requirements that Metro and the city must meet.
The reason I'm asking that question is that if for example, if Metro operated, say, on the FEMA's cut and fill, and then we operated on a different one, we may end up cutting in areas that Metro's ordinances or requirements would not deal with, and that'd be my question.
Yeah, I take that point, but right now we are not at variance at all. I'm looking at Nancy's face as well. With any Metro requirements, this would be a subsequent requirement. We'd have to deal with it generally. So I'm not as concerned about that point.
Okay. My understanding is the specific, I mean, I'm sure a lot of these developments and so forth, they'll be coming back to us as the different phases come through, and it sounds like me the more urgent phase right now is the phase 1 and 2 to get it moving. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
And so I was particularly concerned about that one because it's a kind of a phase 1 issue. But I guess I have a couple of other questions that are concerning me, and one is that the question and the issue of parking has come up. You've talked about the boat slips and so forth in this particular area. You mentioned ramps to get the kayaks and the canoes down there. You haven't mentioned any boat ramps for the motorized boats, and I don't know if you're planning them, but I hope you're not.
No, we are not.
Okay, so these would be boats to be accessing the cove from the river.
That's correct.
To utilize that facility.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, if there are no further questions, maybe we do the, excuse me.
I
Commissioner
just-
Slack. Commissioner Leland? No, you're on.
I was just going to respond one more time to Commissioner Neely's question. If at the time we go in for permits for the buildings, if there is some adjustment in the FEMA level, we would simply elevate those buildings in order to accommodate it. And that's what I went over and asked Ed, is that, believe me, they will be monitoring that very closely. And if it has to go up 2 feet,
Yeah, we
It
can
goes
build
up-
that right into the parking structure.
Because-
We discussed that. Right now, we're at 52 for a finished floor. The requirement with FEMA is 48 point something, and the city is 50.7. So we're actually designing beyond what the requirement is currently. And we have the ability to just push up the concrete parking structure if, in fact, we have to do that in the future.
Okay.
Commissioner Slack and then Commissioner Smith.
One of the things that I'm always looking at is the connectivity to other areas. And Main Street is really, the downtown part of Main Street's really on my heart. So I want to make sure, and I don't know if this is the right place or where it is, but that we have good, we want the residents in this area here to use the new downtown that's going to come about there. And so we want them to be able to get there as easily and effectively by bicycle and by pedestrian as we can. The second thing, as I read through here, was easy access to by pedestrian or bicycle to the Oregon City Shopping Center. And I walk down there most every day and realize that, at least currently, trying to get from Main Street up to that is not a good, there's not a good situation there. And I don't know whether that's part of your project or coordination with somebody else, but I know it was mentioned here, but there really isn't, at this point, a good way to get from that area, even though we have good ped paths going along that area. So,
Well, you know, there's that slope which goes from the entry area, the water feature, and it goes up to the parking behind Firestone in that area. We've asked the engineers to look at doing a switchback or whatever it takes to get a pedestrian path, and if it took even putting a little bridge that would go cross over the water feature, and then you could actually go into a switchback that would take you up and enter onto that part, which is right next to the Firestone on the end of the building. If you go in anywhere else, you're going into the back of all that, the buildings, and it's all locked out. So that would be something that we would do. We had that as a requirement in the Lake Oswego project, which came out of just this kind of a meeting, and we went ahead and built that out of what was wooden stairs that probably went up 30 feet. So it was a switchback, and that actually worked out very well, and people used it a lot. So it's something that we will incorporate.
One of the other issues we're still wrestling with right now is some type of connector road that actually connects back to the shopping center. Definitely, we have some differences of opinion on that, but we'll work through that. And it's also some of the issues that we address, some of the ODOT concern we'll be looking at as well.
Excuse me just a moment. Since we're short on time, may I ask how many of you, to a show of hands of how many of you have come to testify this evening? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 5. Okay, we probably could go for another 10 minutes for questions from us, if that's okay with you, and then we'll open for public testimony and use any extra time for questions again. Okay, next.
This is actually continuing on what Commissioner Slack was talking about. I really, as well, share the same concerns that all these things tie together, and the way that the shopping center is now is not the best for that situation. And I know that we can't really control that area necessarily at the moment, but we should at least make sure that this plan is flexible enough so that if at a time that the development goes in, that the shopping center does realize that there's some interest in redeveloping the shopping center or doing something with it so that it also ties in with the development that we've just put in. And so the reason I bring that up is because I think that's why the crucial element is the placement of that Kaiser building or whatever building goes in there, because wherever you sit that building is determining what's left of an option for where a road could go through. And I know in past plans that the Trails End master plan at one time showed a road possibly going through the shopping center into that area. And I know, so I'm just wondering, making sure that that building, the Kaiser building, is placed in a way that if things change in the future, we have the ability to, connect to that shopping center in some way. Because I think right now we're building a pretty amazing development, I think, that is completely shut out by the shopping center. And so I think at some point, with the project that you're talking about in Lake Oswego, that the project that you did on the waterfront actually made the shopping center across the street really consider redoing some things and tying in. And I think that is definitely a possibility that could happen here. Right now, obviously the shopping center is where it's at, but in the future, it may tie in a lot better. And so I think it's really key to where we place that building.
In the past, I had a number of conversations with the previous owner of the shopping center about penetrating the building so that there was a connection. At one time, it was considered as a road, and then there was discussion about a pedestrian connection, similar to what we did in downtown Bend. We have not talked to the new owners. I suspect they're waiting to see what happens behind them. But with that much buying power lying right behind them, I think that it would be foolish not to open up a connection and allow people to walk into the shopping center. So it's something we can explore.
And we actually did get a hold of 3D group in San Francisco when we were going through one of the iterations and talked to them about, can we cut a hole right through the middle of your project? And we actually did a design to do that. It really, we would have had to buy one of the main buildings that was in that whole long line that connects to our property, and then we would have had to gone into a parking lot that was a mass parking lot, and it needs to be redeveloped. It's not something that you want to just poke a hole in. It would have, to me, been a very poor marketing window and not something that we would want to really promote. So it's definitely something where you'd want to plan for the future, but not something that you want to fool with at this moment.
My understanding is, President Ham, too, that's back on the market. So,
yeah. Commissioner Shaw, then Commissioner West, then Commissioner Crocker.
My apologies for being tardy this evening. Simple question. I think this is for Mr. Parks. The city's financial responsibility is only going to be for the $10 million, or are there site improvements, local improvements around that we're going to have to be responsible for?
Yeah, my understanding is the agency is providing up to $10 million for this.
So it's the 10 million. Okay, thank you.
First of all, the number that sticks with me tonight, I've listened to many presentations on the Cove before, but is 72% of the area in open space. I just can't tell you how much it's just really like adding a new park in Oregon City. It's really wonderful. This not being a gated development, I just think is wonderful. It's not a beaver lake where it's private only, and I just really like this. So I don't know if I'm talking too many details at this point in the process, but I think what Rocky was referring to, and I had seen somewhere, I don't know where I got this, was the extension of Dunes Drive. Is that what I had, that a possible street that would go through for a vehicular access to, at some point when that redevelops, to get into the Cove? And then the other point is, on the trail connectivity, has it ever been explored of going next to the river because of how the trails end up in Clackamas Park and just continuing through the parking lot with signage and then going out on the short point there and hooking up?
You know, we have gone down and walked that area and just felt like that with the amount of water flow, et cetera, that was there, and then the bridge and the abutment
Yeah,
that's there.
under the bridge and
And we met some very unique people when we were down there.
Yes.
We were offered a beer at 8 in the morning.
Yes.
It's called diversity.
But that is perhaps the reason why I'm getting at this is maybe that would change the complexion of that because certainly you're going to sell a high-end car or mid, you know, you want to have a nice area, so maybe some of that would change. I realize Gladstone owns some of it and that won't change, but maybe
It may. It may.
Yep.
I'd just like to reiterate what Commissioner Slack said with the importance of downtown, our core downtown right now, and there's a lot of interested and involved citizens really trying to rejuvenate and re-energize that downtown area, and I think there's some huge potential for this type of project to help, but I would want to I want to make sure that that's at least on your mind a little bit, is how can we connect the Cove to the downtown? That's the first part of my question. And my second part then is also with the designs, the architectural designs of the buildings, are those just mock-ups or are those in stone right now? Is that exactly what's going to be built?
No, that's very close to what will be done. Colors, materials, that's what we've got on the drawing boards. They are preliminary drawings. They need to go to formal CDs, construction documents. But the intent, that's it.
Okay.
Yes.
One of my reasons for this is urban renewal has had real issues with what do we want to fund specifically for our grant program and what do we not want to fund, because we don't really have guidelines in place for design, and we're currently in the middle of working on those right now, and I guess my concern would be that in designing your properties that it will kind of mesh with the vision that we have for the future of the redevelopment of Main Street and downtown. So, we want to keep a pulse of historic downtown Main Street, Oregon City, while also being cognizant of the future and development uses. So I guess what I'm saying is, before you guys get way down the path, at least if there could be some dialogue, I guess, between the group Urban Renewal working on design standards. So eventually if this does go in and everything goes as planned and everything's redeveloped on Main Street all the way down to the mill site, that it all is cohesive and it all fits together and it feels right.
I think that there's an opportunity to do that in, the street signing, the way that we put in the lighting. The buildings, as kind of a little independent area, have been pretty much gone through. We did look at one point in time at the architecture of using a lot of brick. Matter of fact, the mayor of Lake Oswego said, you're going to turn our city into a new brick city because we did so many projects utilizing brick. We went through that, and they are pretty big buildings. They're massive, quite honestly, at 5 stories. And the intent was to really soften them with a combination of wood and different materials. So they're not inexpensive to build. These are pretty expensive buildings because there's a lot of stone on the front and on the back of them. Then when using the wood materials, we've changed the colors, I think Randy was discussing, so that you have, for that size of building, you have a lot of color changes and you have material changes. So they are pretty well locked in. That doesn't mean that we can't, as we move through, look at what's being designed, what the criteria is in the future. But usually when you first do that first increment, you want the rest of the project to fit.
So are the windows vinyl or wood, or what are the materials on the windows?
They are vinyl windows, yes.
If I may give some context here, the slides that you see of the buildings are really inadequate, I think, to communicate the quality of the buildings they've designed. One of the reasons they were selected is because they have experience with high-quality buildings. Working in as many downtowns as we do and being the advisor to the city, part of the strategy, which began over 3 years ago, was to expand the downtown into the regional center, which is the designation that comes from Region 2040. and a recognition that downtowns are really a collection of districts. So the historic downtown is really a historic district. In some respects, your downtown has moved up on the hill where most of the shopping is. But so you have this older historic district downtown. Then we have these two challenging sites at the Cove and the old landfill, which we decided to tackle first because they were big and they were a problem, but they're almost also an opportunity. So in fact, we're working with City of Portland now on the entire downtown, and the recognition that there are different districts that comprise the downtown. What glues them together is the public realm, the streets, the public buildings, the parks, the open space, and that's where the consistency needs to be. And so there's certain places where historic buildings do absolutely need to be preserved, but there's other places where there may be a variety of architecture that comes in that's complementary. History carried too far becomes a caricature, and so we've done some work on this with Dan's staff and with Don Stasny, who's also an advisor to the city, trying to look at how do all these parts in these districts glue together, and it's still an emerging work in progress. But we're very cognizant of it, and we're very cognizant of the need for connectivity.
And I think that's what I wanted to hear is
Yeah.
complementary, and we don't want caricatures, but
Right.
complementary to what hopefully will be happening in the next few years.
But I think that if you wanted to see details on those buildings, you have some sheets that show in good detail elevations with that I think read much better than the slide. The SketchUp program, which is what you used, is great for showing a big picture, but you really need to look at the detail. I'm sorry for
Yes.
taking so much time.
Well, it's important to get that out,
Yeah.
but I did, since people came prepared to testify, with your indulgence, since we have more time to look at this, I'd like to open the public hearing. First, Dan Fowler, followed by Paul Edgar. Why don't the two of you come together, and while they're clearing off, when you come to the microphone, we ask you limit your comments to 3 minutes, if you can, and please state your name and then
I think
city
we
in
have
which
to say
you
limit their
reside.
comments to 3 minutes.
What did I say?
You said, or if you can.
Oh, yeah, no, I said 3 minutes, yes. 3 minutes or less, I thought. Less if you can, is what I meant. So you'll need to be succinct. Okay, Dan, why don't you go ahead?
Good evening, members of the Urban Renewal Commission. Dan Fowler, Oregon City. Just a couple of quick comments. It may be rare that I stay under 3 minutes, but I'm sure I will tonight.
Yes, you will.
One is I had the privilege of sitting where you're sitting when we were purchasing that land. And
Thank
I
you.
just wanted to say that at that time, we talked about things that we hoped for in the community. And I can't tell you how this project meets so many things that we hope for. Not only does it create 70% open space and parkland, which was one of our major goals when we sat on the Urban Renewal Commission. We bought every piece of property that we could buy on the waterfront. We bought the property where John Stearns Park is at. We bought the Cove. We bought everything we could because we knew it was going to be valuable to the future of our city. We didn't know exactly how it was going to be developed, but we knew it was going to be valuable. Done right, it does create value. I think this project does just that. It creates a mixed use with office, with residential, with activity that's created with that, maybe some restaurants, some shops. I share the sentiment on connectivity to downtown. I think that's done through proper infrastructure. I think actually straightening that road out is going to help do that. And creating the value at the Cove, I think, will be a bookend that pushes the change in downtown to happen and really connect the historic downtown to the Cove. So, let alone the fact that it's a local economic stimulus that hopefully can create temporary and permanent jobs for our community. So, I think it does a lot of good things, and I hope that get the details that you need to get done, but support the project.
Thank you.
Hello, Paul Edgar. I'm from Oregon City. I've included here a text of a lot of thoughts, and obviously I can't cover them all in 3 minutes, so I thought I should put it into writing. I think the most important thing is that they're trying to ram the Cove project through without a full discovery process, maybe getting a little bit the horse before the cart. We know that there's not a marketplace right now for condos as envisioned. we can't, it's just a bust. But I think that the Oregon City Shopping Center, Dan has said that it may be available for $30 million. It could be available for far less than that. But the point is that that may be our best use of urban renewal. And one of the things we really have to think about is best use, best public process of $10 million, and how do we create what is the best for Oregon City in creating jobs and a long-term image of what the city's going to be. And I'm concerned about the $10 million being prioritized when we don't, in fact, have any jobs really here. And I originally came to the city with the information talking about Kaiser. And if you remember back, well, I sat in a medical complex with the people from Kaiser, and they said they wanted to relocate here. And I mentioned that at the city council, 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago. But the big problem really is that we know that there are environmental conditions. We now know that there was just recently on the Parker lands an unauthorized garbage dump site. And we understand also that there is more contaminated groundwater. And if anybody knows anything about plumbing, water flows downhill, and above it is the Rossman landfill and all of the rest of it. And it's flowing into this site. And I really think before we go off half-cocked, we have to have a full understanding of not only the dredging and the fish and everything else to make all these pieces come together. We need to know that this groundwater, the water in the cove, is going to be safe. Can it be an aquatic area? We don't know that yet. We really don't. And so what it boils down to, we've got seismic problems, we've got all sorts of problems that are in front of us, all sorts of contingencies. We have to have all of those rocks turned over. We have to have a full understanding of every contingency.
Thank you. Next, Elizabeth Fowler and Amber Holbeck. Please come up together.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Fowler. I'm here as a concerned citizen and born and raised here in Oregon City, and as well as part of the Main Street program. One thing that I really enjoy looking at a project like this is that I really feel like it brings a new dynamic to our city. It creates something new livable space, something that's fresh, desirable. And in the relation to not only creating new jobs, but in the kind of the connectivity to Oregon City downtown Main Street, I think that that's something that definitely will be addressed not only by the people working on the Main Street program, but others as well, just because connectivity to the areas is obviously an important piece of both developments. The big thing that I see it helping on the Main Street end of things is really that base of people and that livable space downtown to draw people into downtown, which gives businesses, prospective businesses, a reason to locate to downtown Oregon City. As we all know, downtown Oregon City is plagued with many problems right now. Parking, there is no kind of livable space on Main Street. The occupancy by the county, so we have lots of different issues to overcome, and this really does help give us a viable way to attract new businesses to downtown. One of the things we've been facing on that committee, as some of you are aware of, is that how do we attract new businesses with no potential of kind of built-in client base? And so how do you want people to live here and work here if there's no businesses and things to do in your spare time? So this project definitely kind of tackles some of those issues for us, and I think is a great addition to our city. So I urge you to support it.
Thank you.
Good evening, Urban Renewal Commission. I'm Amber Holbeck. I'm representing the Oregon City Chamber this evening. And what I guess I'd like to share is that existing land at the Clackamas Cove area is contributing very, very little to, A, the livability of Oregon City, B, the economy of Oregon City, and C, even the image of Oregon City. And so I think those are three portions that you need to look at what do we have available and what can we do with that available land. The Chamber supported, actually, the Clackamas Cove project since 2006. And when I first came on to the Chamber in 2005, that was one of the first things that I heard about in learning what is happening in Oregon City. And that project had not just started then. It's been a work in progress over a period of time. Pacific Property Search was chosen very carefully. They have a track record of quality developments and some that are less than desirable properties to begin with, have to get over a few little bumps along the way. Pacific Property Search has also incorporated concerns of citizens to care for and improve the environmental conditions. I know that there were lengthy discussions with citizens dealing with their concerns about habitat and certain kinds of animals, fish, wildlife, you name it, that were addressed and really were taken into great care to incorporate into the plan. I would say they've been proactive, in fact, to community and citizen concerns. So I think that the Urban Renewal Commission needs to hear that from another perspective. Clackamas Cove will be a key launching point for Oregon City to draw together people, business, and nature, which all incorporates a livability. And I think that's what we're all looking for. One of the pieces, the points of business that I think can't be negated or minimized is the fact that Kaiser Permanente is looking at the medical offices there. And folks, our population is living longer. One of the key needs that we talk about is long-term health care. We have to have the health care piece addressed. And those centers have to be available, widely spread. So not only are jobs coming to Oregon City as part of that, but so are the patients. And sometimes those patients need to eat, and sometimes those patients need to grab some gasoline, and sometimes those patients need to come around and see what's happening in downtown. I guess that's all I would add. Thank you so much, and please support the Clackamas Cove project.
Thank you. And our last speaker, Larry Baker.
Larry Baker. I'm a local business owner. We started a bank here in December of '06 and brought in $14 million worth of equity to start it, so I know how tough it is to raise money. I have no interest in this project from a banking viewpoint because I'm sure the Bank of America can take care of these larger situations. However, I'm excited about Oregon City growing, and I was very impressed by the amount of study and money that's already been invested in this by the developers. This isn't a project that's been someone came in 6 and 12 months and put a plan together. These fellows have been working on this for several years. They've invested a significant amount of funds. I don't think that they would continue pressing forward if they thought this was a failure. Oregon City, and I've said this before, wants to be a destination. This is another project that can make Oregon City a destination. 72 acres of open land, a medical facility that would be very valuable for the area, beautifying the area, being a north entrance for the city, that people would recognize Oregon City as a developing area. And I know we want to develop the downtown and draw everyone together, but I think we have to take baby steps, and this is one of those steps. That we have a very valuable piece of property. It needs unique buildings on it because there isn't a lot of land on the water. So you're not going to build apartment houses there. I think condos are probably the only way to go. And I don't know if it was really emphasized, but as far as the timing of this, they're not saying that they're going to build the condos this year. The economy isn't very friendly toward condominiums this year. But as they build this out, it's going to be built in several phases. So those first buildings will probably come on in about 18 to 24 months. And hopefully our economy will get better. Now, I'm not an economist, and I'm just a banker, and I try to figure out what is going to happen down the road. But if you have any faith at all in the American way of life, you know that there are cycles to our economy, and I think we're going to come out of it. So I'd like you to consider this project. I think it's an Oregon City Gold Star project.
Thank you. We do have one more speaker. I'd like to conclude by quarter till because we have to reset the room. So, William Gifford.
Members of the council, I'm William Gifford, I live in Oregon City, and I want to personally say how much I support this project. I think this cove is going to be a real shot in the arm for Oregon City, and I want to really urge you to move forward on that prudently, of course. But I did have a couple of questions that I needed clarification on. On page 10, Mr. Parks referred to that, but he didn't refer to the income tax revenues. It talks about state income tax revenue generated from the new 334 employees at the cove, estimated $2.8 million. I'm hoping there's not an assumption that all 334 employees will be living in Oregon City, because I don't want us to be imagining that that's going to be coming into us because they aren't going to all be living in Oregon City. And furthermore, those 334 employees aren't going to come on board all at once either. So I didn't want us to think that as soon as we turn this on that we're going to be getting that income tax revenue. There will be other revenue, of course, but
Do you have other questions?
I understand, but it's putting on here as a plus for something, but it's not necessarily a plus for Oregon City. It'll help the school districts.
It helps the schools.
It helps the state.
That's how we
Very
fund
good.
public schools.
Right, yeah. I understand that point. I'm just pointing out that they're not all...
And we do get
Oh, yeah, wouldn't that be nice? And the last thing, though, I heard a comment during their presentation about cut and fill, and the figures were cutting 250,000 somethings and filling 250,000 somethings. I assume there were cubic somethings. And then a total of 500,000 moving somethings. But it seemed to me as though if you're cutting 250 and you're planning on making it equal, it's the same 250,000, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
But
Yes, it
the
is.
purpose is you do not want to change the net flood capacity by taking
That I
material from
understand.
someplace else.
Yeah, it just sounded like it doubled the amount of trucks moving. When you got one filled, you got to empty it. So,
Yeah.
okay.
So noted. Thank you very much. I think some good questions have been asked, and you have an opportunity to ask more. Our next Urban Renewal Commission meeting will be when?
Let's tentatively plan for a meeting next week. It may be actually the first meeting in February. It really is going to depend on our conversations tomorrow.
So prior to the Wednesday meeting?
Yeah, I will,
February
after
5th?
we have those conversations and we look at some of these other issues, I can be more definitive and let you know kind of when we need to move forward. But you might want to kind of look at, I think you had a conflict on Wednesday. So
And
maybe
Thursday.
And Thursday. And we'll scramble around.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Commissioner
I
Neely.
agree. I saw your timeline in terms of the conflicts. I presume we could have the meetings at 7:30 or something of that nature, too. It need not be
Sure.
this early.
Yeah, on a off-council day, we could have it later in the evening. Again, we have a lot of work, and I don't want to bring the development agreement to you till we have all the i's dotted and the t's crossed, and that may take a bit longer.
Well, we'll be flexible. We'll watch our
We're going to
email
need to
and
look at these other folks' schedules and see, I need to figure out really what is the dates that all this needs to come together on, so.
I do have a request. When you come back, I'd like to have a bit more discussion in terms of the parks maintenance piece.
Okay. Any other things you want to put on the table for the next discussion?
Yes.
Commissioner Nocita.
I want to bring up the issue of the purchase of the Glacier property, the valuation of it. I'd like to get copies of the appraisals and the sales agreements for those properties. I think that all needs to be discussed.
The Glacier appraisal, which piece are we talking about?
Well, in
Because
the
there's-
report,
but-
it has us purchasing.
It's the 1.8 acres that goes right through the middle of the property.
Okay.
Just so you understand what it is, it's a thin strip, it's
just
just
a little bit.
goes right through the middle. And if you recall, the city council, I believe, actually said that there was a potential for them going through a condemnation on this. And Glacier decided to move from the site, so that the purchase of that property was twofold. It was $750,000. That was broken into about $350,000 for a relocation cost, and the other for this small piece that goes through the middle of the project.
Is that what's called the Parker remain? I'm looking at page 17.
No, that's That's
No,
called the
that's-
glacier piece.
Yeah.
Okay.
Parker remaining piece, Parker owns this piece right here. The road is being realigned, come down here. This is the Kaiser piece, this is the Parker remaining piece. So the intent is for the city to sell this to Kaiser. This is the remainder piece, and then this piece that comes through here. So it takes and it puts all of the property in the city's ownership. So that's the intent of
Okay.
these additional two pieces. There isn't an appraisal for the glacier piece. What's been appraised is the overall project in total that was done by Palmer Grove Piatka.
Okay, what establishes on page 17 the $1,323,000 figure?
That is the contract price for the overall piece.
Sales.
The pro rata portion that's left over here on the Parker piece. It's the remaining piece that Kaiser is not purchasing. That's the balance, which is called the second phase, the remainder. Yes, that's what we negotiated, that the purchase price in total, and we took and sold this piece off, and the remainder was this piece.
Okay, because this is all under public investment on page 17.
That's correct. There's two areas. It's the infrastructure. It's this little piece the city be buying, and this little piece of Parker. Then ultimately, when we take down phase one, we pay a pro rata share of all of those costs that have gone in.
What documentation establishes what we, the city of Oregon City, are going to be paying?
There is a drawing that goes through and talks about the takedown. It's this drawing here, and there's a plat that has been drawn and submitted to the city. It goes through and it takes and lists all of the tracks and all the pieces.
That's what he's asking.
So what comes into the city's ownership would be this piece through here, and the city owns everything else with the exception of this one piece, which is the Kaiser piece.
I
Mr.
think, though,
Patterson.
what is being asked here is how did we arrive at the
At the number.
$9.8 million? And that has to do, again, we can walk you through those numbers. That's
No, I'm not asking about the 9 million total. I'm
It's the
asking
1.3.
specific line items of 1.3 and 500,000.
Right.
What
Well, the 1.
establishes those specific numbers?
The 1.3 was a negotiated price. That was what the seller was negotiated to,
Negotiated by whom?
by PPS. And then the reuse...
But why is that then? Why is that listed under public investment then?
Well, the reason it's listed is because the city is going to acquire not only that piece, which is the remainder piece, it's acquiring this piece, so it's taken and it's created this assemblage, technical term, but now the city owns all of the property in total, and then they're going to turn around and say, all right, as long as we perform, we will sell you that at a fair reuse value, which includes that piece and that piece. You cannot move forward with the project at all with this piece running right through the middle. So to do the infrastructure, to put in all of the new roads, that needs to be owned in total. So that's the reason for this acquisition here and this acquisition here. So when we finish phase one and phase two of the infrastructure, with the city paying for the infrastructure and taking possession and ownership of these two pieces, the city has it in total control. So when we come down and we say, all right, we're going to start this right here, we take 224 units, take the appraised value at that time, divide it into that number, and we pay a pro rata share as we take these down. So you've really, in looking at it from a developer's point of view and from this body, you need to control the project in total, the property, or you don't have a project. With this not being in ownership, you can't even do the project at all. So that's the intent, and that's the reason for the public investment. We come back and we pay for it.
I think the
Thank you.
reuse appraisal will be helpful.
Yes, I think that this is a longer conversation, and so I hate to shut it off because it's an important one for us to understand the pieces. But we have another meeting, so we'll come back together again, and don't forget to bring your questions. We are adjourned.